Hey everybody, Session Prayer, Autotask office hours. So I saw an interesting post. Most of my videos are based on questions people send to me via email. Please feel free, Dustin at giantrocketship.com. Just stumbled on this one on an Autotask group. I thought it was a very interesting question. So I want to use a workflow in Autotask to automatically close tickets when a specific user logs in their work hours. We can definitely do that using Autotask workflows. The question, of course, is why would you want to do this? If you're outsourcing something, or rather not using the outsource module in Autotask, but you just have a task-oriented technician, so you just assign them very specific tickets. And a workflow rule, I would probably not just automatically do it for all tickets. I would probably say if the ticket was in a certain queue or not. But let's take a look at this. So you should be seeing my Autotask screen, and let's go to workflow rules. And if you've watched my podcast before, you'll know I don't actually test any of this before the call. Let me fix this. Sorry if I flipped you around a bit there. I don't typically do any work before these podcasts because I want to do it live. One of the best, to me, ways I can do this podcast is to make mistakes and fumble around a little bit, because that's honestly how you're going to do it a lot of times. That doesn't matter if you're doing Autotask or Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever. Sometimes you just got to kind of work through the logic of it to just show you how I'm going to do this. Let's see, auto close on tech time entry. You can use description. I would argue that naming typically means you don't need to enter description. And I have another video on how I would actually organize my workflow rules. So any workflow rule for my service desk would start with this. For my knock would start with this. That's a simple way to organize things. And let's take a look here. This is pretty easy. The struggle here is it's for a specific technician. So this solves part of the problem. Remember, the request from them was, I'm planning to use a workflow rule in Autotask to automate closing tickets with a specific user. That's called a resource in Autotask, enters their time. So this is when any user adds their time. So we're halfway there. Then the next question is, how do you hone in on that specific user? I like to always have a status filter here. Now this one's going to be, make sure it's not closed to close it. It's kind of goofy, but I do like to, and I have a video on this, I like to protect my workflow rules. And if you've worked with workflow rules in any platform, you know that it really sucks when your workflow rule goes crazy and it does a bunch of batch updates that you weren't. And this is one way to protect yourself, is status not equal to complete. And then this will ensure that some backend update by an API adding a note to 1,000 data ORM tickets, for example, that are already closed, your workflow will suddenly email 1,000 customers notifications, which I have had happen way back in the day when I owned MSP. So it protects us from that happening. And then, man, we're in a pickle here. So time added by resource. Unfortunately, there's no filters here that will let us specifically say if the resource that entered the time was Bob. But so long as we have a process in place where Bob is the primary resource on the ticket, then I think we would be good here. So we can narrow things down a little bit more. Equal to max. Let's say it's just tickets that Max is working in a specific queue or ticket category. So mainly if he does monitoring alert tickets. I would struggle auto closing based on this, just blanket anything that owned by Max. I would like to have some filtering here. And this would work probably better here. And then status equals complete. Now, I would probably do a little bit more here. I might have a UDF, a user-defined field that says auto closed, and then I would set that to yes. And that would let me track which tickets this workflow rule hit. And by the way, UDFs really work well for tracking stuff, because you might have a UDF that says, so you might have a UDF called this, And then whenever this workflow rule fires against a ticket, it sets this to yes. And that is a very good way to track which tickets are hit by which rules. But there's certain very powerful, dangerous workflow rules or things where you need a dashboard against it. That's a good use case for UDFs. This is probably how I would do it. And you would need a process to ensure that this was always going to be valid and correct. Also, I'm just looking at this. And then I probably would, the status needs to be more complete. Maybe the status is not equal to that, or it needs to be in a list where it's in a workable state, right? Like only if it's one of these tickets would we allow it. In other words, even because you might have like dispatcher, although of course if you're using giant rocket ship, you don't necessarily need a dispatcher, but it's just kind of risky here. I think you really want to hone in on what's going on. So that's a much safer way to do this than just saying if it's been, assigned and it's not closed. That's probably how I would do this. And I would go ahead and save and let this run. I would test this against a ticket a couple of different ways, and I would make sure I was protecting these tickets from being messed around with by my other staff. But there you go. So Dustin Purrier, Giant Rocket Ship, are my Autotask office hours. I will see you on the next podcast. Thank you. Bye.